The email arrived at 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon in early March. Subject line, Personnel Matter Confidential. Sender Margaret Chen, Director of Human Resources. Meeting time, 5:50 p.m. sharp. Location, Building C, 3rd floor conference room. I didn't need to open the attachment to know what it contained. After 9 years working at Harman Financial Services, a mid-sized investment advisory firm managing approximately $800 million in client assets, I'd seen this play before. The late afternoon timing, the generic subject line. The R presence without your direct supervisor. It was the corporate version of being called to the principal's office, except this time you don't get to go back to class afterward. My name is Rachel Moreno. I'm 38 years old, and for nearly a decade, I've been the person who makes sure our clients' money doesn't accidentally fund terrorism, money laundering, or securities fraud. My official title is Senior Compliance Analyst, which is the kind of job that makes people's eyes glaze over at dinner parties. I monitor suspicious transactions. I file suspicious activity reports with FinCEN. I ensure our broker-dealers maintain proper licensing. I verify that client funds are segregated correctly and that our advisors aren't churning accounts to generate commissions. It's not glamorous work. Nobody writes news articles about the compliance analyst who prevented a potential violation. There are no award ceremonies for catching a wire transfer that looked slightly off. But it's the kind of work that keeps an investment firm from losing its licenses when federal regulators show up asking pointed questions about client fund handling. I didn't panic when I saw that meeting invitation. Panic requires surprise, and I'd been watching the storm build for 7 months, each week adding another layer of tension that nobody wanted to acknowledge but everyone could feel. So I took a sip of water from the bottle on my desk, archived the email, and went back to finishing a quarterly anti-money laundering review that nobody upstairs particularly cared about. After 9 years, your hands keep working even when your brain knows the people in charge have decided you're expendable. Professionalism doesn't stop just because you're about to become unemployed. At 4:52 p.m., I saved my final document, backed up my work files to my personal cloud storage, and stood from my desk. I'd already quietly removed the few personal items from my office that morning, not because I'm paranoid, but because I understand patterns. When you've been around corporate environments long enough, you learn to read the temperature before the fever breaks. The walk from my office to Building C took approximately 4 minutes, long enough to notice that several colleagues suddenly found their computer screens fascinating as I passed, long enough to see Amanda from accounting quickly end a phone call when she spotted me, long enough to feel the specific loneliness of being the person everyone knows is about to be made an example of. I was crossing through the main lobby when I heard it. A sound that most people wouldn't register as significant. The electronic beep of our visitor management system processing multiple check-ins simultaneously. 3 distinct tones in rapid succession. I slowed my pace and glanced toward the security desk. 3 people in business attire stood at the entrance. 2 women, 1 man. The man wore a lanyard with a badge I recognized immediately from my training materials. Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, the federal agency that oversees anti-money laundering compliance for financial institutions. The taller woman carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy enough to contain substantial documentation. They weren't smiling. They weren't asking our receptionist for directions to a meeting room. They were presenting credentials and moving through security with the kind of purposeful efficiency that doesn't wait for permission or appointment confirmations. Our receptionist, a young woman named Jennifer who'd been with the company for maybe 18 months, picked up her phone with hands that trembled slightly. Her voice carried just far enough for me to hear the edges of panic. There are federal agents here. FinCEN, they're asking for Rachel Moreno immediately. They say it's urgent regarding filed reports. They're not on the schedule. My heart rate accelerated, not with fear exactly, but with something sharper. Recognition, vindication maybe. Or, perhaps, just the grim satisfaction of knowing you were right about something terrible. I changed direction. Instead of heading toward Building C where Margaret Chen was preparing to terminate my employment, I walked directly toward the security desk. The man with the FinCEN badge saw me approaching. He was in his early 50s with gray hair and the kind of weathered expression that comes from years of investigating financial crimes. "Rachel Moreno?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I said. He extended his hand. "Special Agent Robert Castellano, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. These are Special Agents Kim Martinez and David Okonkwo. We're here to conduct an urgent inquiry regarding suspicious activity reports filed by your institution over the past 8 months." My stomach performed a complicated maneuver that was simultaneously a drop and a leap. "Understood. What do you need from me?" Everything, Agent Martinez said. She was shorter than her colleague, with sharp eyes that had probably seen every variation of financial deception imaginable. We need your original documentation, your correspondence, your analysis notes, and your honest assessment of whether the SARs your firm filed actually reflect the suspicious activity you identified. Behind me, I heard rapid footsteps. Margaret Chen appeared at the edge of the lobby, slightly out of breath, her professional mask slipping just enough to show alarm. "Excuse me, can I help you? We weren't notified of any federal visit today." Agent Castellano turned to her with an expression that could have frozen boiling water. "Federal investigations under the Bank Secrecy Act don't require advance notification, ma'am. We're here under statutory authority to examine compliance records and interview relevant personnel. Your cooperation is mandatory under federal law, not optional." Margaret's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "I need to notify our CO. You do that," Martinez said. "In the meantime, we'll be speaking with Miss Moreno. I assume there's a private room available? Conference room 7, I said. "Down this hall, third door on the right," Castellano nodded. "Lead the way." As I walked past Margaret, I saw her fingers flying across her phone screen. I didn't need psychic powers to know what the message said. Within 60 seconds, every executive in the building would know that federal agents had arrived unannounced and were currently sequestered with a compliance analyst who was supposed to be fired in 8 minutes. Conference room 7 was medium-sized, windowless, and equipped with a table that could seat 8 people comfortably. Castellano took the head of the table. Martinez and Okonkwo sat on either side. I sat across from them, hands folded, trying to project a calm I didn't entirely feel. Castellano opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Miss Moreno, I'm going to be direct with you. Over the past 8 months, your firm has filed 17 suspicious activity reports with our agency. Those reports relate to potential money laundering, structuring violations, and possible securities fraud." He pulled out several documents and slid them across the table. I recognized them immediately. SARs I'd initiated. My name was on the filing documentation. "That's my work," I said. "Did you personally prepare the analysis for each of these reports?" Martinez asked. I looked at the documents, at the neat summaries and the transaction patterns and the risk assessments. Then I looked up at the 3 federal agents. "I prepared the initial analysis for each one," I said carefully. "But the versions that were actually filed with your agency were modified, significantly modified, without my knowledge or approval." Okonkwo leaned forward. He'd been quiet until now, but his voice carried weight. "Can you explain what you mean by modified?" "I can," I said. "But first I need to understand something. Am I under investigation personally?" "No," Castellano said firmly. "You're not a target. We're here to determine whether your firm is in compliance with anti-money laundering regulations and whether the reports filed with our agency accurately reflect suspicious activity. Your cooperation is voluntary but extremely helpful." "I'll cooperate," I said, "but I need it on record that I'm about to tell you things that directly contradict what my employer reported to your agency. And I need it on record that approximately 8 minutes ago, I was scheduled to be terminated from my position." The 3 agents exchanged glances. Martinez's eyebrows rose slightly. "You were scheduled to be fired today?" Castellano asked. 5:00 p.m., I said. "Building C conference room." The meeting invitation was sent this morning. Subject line, personnel matter confidential. "Did your employer provide a reason for the termination?" Okonkwo asked. "Not officially," I said. "But I can tell you the actual reason. I've spent the last 7 months trying to stop them from filing watered-down SARs that don't accurately reflect the risk level of suspicious transactions. I documented every objection I raised. I have email threads, analysis notes, and internal memos showing that I repeatedly flagged high-risk activity that management chose to downplay or exclude from federal reporting." Castellano's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. "Focus sharpening, start from the beginning," he said, "and don't leave anything out." So I did. I told them about Victoria Ashworth's arrival 9 months earlier, how the board had brought her in as CEO from a tech startup background with instructions to modernize operations and increase efficiency, how her first company-wide meeting had been full of buzzwords like disrupting legacy workflows and empowering teams to move at digital speed. I told them how within her first 6 weeks, she'd restructured the entire compliance department, bringing in a new chief compliance officer named Derek Paulson from outside the financial services industry. Someone who understood corporate compliance in a general sense, but didn't understand the specific regulatory environment that governed every aspect of what we did. The first warning sign came in August, I said. I was reviewing wire transfer patterns for one of our larger clients, a real estate development company called Summit Holdings. Over a 3-month period, they'd received approximately $4.7 million in wire transfers from overseas accounts, then almost immediately wired out similar amounts to various domestic accounts in chunks just under $10,000. Classic structuring, Martinez said. Exactly, I said. Remote, white semi. The pattern was textbook, breaking up large transactions into smaller amounts to avoid reporting thresholds. I prepared a detailed SAR analysis, documenting the pattern, the timing, the amounts, everything. I rated it as high risk and recommended immediate filing. What happened? Castellano asked. Derek Paulson reviewed my analysis and sent it back to me, I said. He said the language was too aggressive. He said I was making assumptions about intent that we couldn't prove. He asked me to revise it to focus only on the objective facts without any interpretive analysis. Isn't factual reporting exactly what a SAR should contain? Okonkwo asked. Yes, I said. But the way Derek wanted it revised would have removed all the context that made the activity suspicious in the first place. He wanted me to describe the transactions without connecting them into a pattern, like describing individual trees without acknowledging you're looking at a forest. I pulled out my phone, opened my personal email archive, and found the exchange. This is what Derek wrote to me. Rachel, let's remember that SARs are serious accusations that can have significant impacts on client relationships. Let's ensure our language is measured and doesn't overstate concerns that may have innocent explanations. Did you revise it? Martinez asked. I revised it, I said. But I included a separate memo stating that removing the pattern analysis would make the report less useful to investigators. I said that if we were going to file a SAR at all, it should accurately reflect the risk level. How did that go over? Castellano asked dryly. Derek called me into his office the next day, I said. He told me I was developing a reputation for being overly cautious and compliance-focused to the point of hindering business operations. He said Victoria was trying to build a more balanced culture where we managed risk intelligently without creating unnecessary friction with clients. Martinez's jaw tightened. What happened with the Summit Holdings SAR? It was filed, I said. But the version that went to FinCEN was Derek's revision, not mine. The pattern analysis was removed. The risk assessment was downgraded from high to medium, and several transactions were excluded entirely because Derek said they didn't meet the threshold for suspicious activity. I pulled out my laptop. I kept both versions, the original analysis I prepared and the watered-down version that was actually filed. Would you like to see them? Yes, all 3 agents said simultaneously. I spent the next 20 minutes walking them through case after case, after case. The venture capital firm that showed signs of possible securities fraud, where my detailed analysis was reduced to a generic report about unusual trading patterns. The cryptocurrency exchange that had multiple red flags for money laundering, where half my documented concerns were removed before filing. The offshore trust that was clearly being used for tax evasion, where Derek had changed my high probability of illegal activity assessment to potentially requires additional monitoring. With each case, I showed them my original analysis, the emails where I'd objected to the changes, Derek's responses justifying the modifications, and the final watered-down version that had been filed with FinCEN. By the time I finished, all 3 investigators looked grim. Moreno, Castellano said carefully, what you're describing is systematic weakening of suspicious activity reporting. If your original analyses were accurate, your firm has been filing SARs that materially understate the risk and severity of suspicious transactions. I know, I said. That's a violation of the Bank Secrecy Act, Martinez added. Financial institutions are required to file SARs that accurately and completely report suspicious activity. Intentionally filing misleading or incomplete reports is a federal offense. I know that too, I said. That's why I kept pushing back. That's why I documented everything, and that's probably why I was scheduled to be fired today. There was a sharp knock on the conference room door. All 4 of us turned. Through the small window, I saw Victoria Ashworth standing in the hallway, arms crossed, expression controlled but tight. Castellano stood and opened the door. Can I help you? I'm Victoria Ashworth, CEO of Harmon Financial Services, Victoria said. Her voice had that carefully modulated quality people use when they're furious, but trying to sound professional. I'd like to know why federal agents are in my building conducting interviews without notifying executive leadership. We don't require permission to conduct compliance investigations, Castellano said. We're operating under statutory authority granted by the Bank Secrecy Act. Your cooperation is mandatory under federal law. I understand that, Victoria said tightly, but professional courtesy would suggest notifying the CO when employees are being questioned. Miss Moreno is cooperating voluntarily, Castellano said. And we're gathering information related to suspicious activity reports your firm has filed over the past 8 months. Something flickered across Victoria's face. Not quite fear, but close. Recognition, maybe, or calculation. I see, she said. And has Miss Moreno been helpful? Very, Castellano said. In fact, we're going to need to speak with you next, along with your Chief Compliance Officer, Derek Paulson, and anyone else who had signatory authority on SAR filings. Victoria's composure cracked slightly. In fact, acquainted. Hardtop. Now, Castellano confirmed. Conference room 7 will be occupied for the next several hours. I suggest you make yourself available, and I suggest you have your legal counsel present. I have a meeting scheduled for 5 p.m., Victoria said. Cancel it, Castellano said. Well, then he closed the door. Through the window, I watched Victoria stand in the hallway for a moment, visibly processing what had just happened. Then she turned and walked away quickly, heels clicking against the floor like a timer counting down to something inevitable. Castellano sat back down. That's your CO? That's her, I said. And she was planning to fire you in, he checked his watch, about 3 minutes from now. According to my calendar invitation, yes. Castellano pulled out his phone and typed something. I'm sending a formal notification to your HAR department and your CO. It states that any employment actions taken against you during this investigation will be considered potential retaliation and will be investigated as obstruction of justice. That should keep you employed for at least the next 72 hours. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me, Castellano said. Thank yourself for keeping records. Without your documentation, we'd be looking at a lot of he said, she said arguments. With it, we have a paper trail that's going to be very difficult for your employer to explain away. Martinez stood. We're going to need to interview your colleagues, starting with Derek Paulson. Can you tell us where to find him? I gave them office locations and extension numbers. They left to begin pulling people in for questioning. Okonkwo stayed behind, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Off the record, he said. How long have you known this was all going to collapse? Since August, I said. Maybe earlier. There's a pattern to these things. When leadership starts treating regulations as obstacles instead of requirements, when they start prioritizing client relationships over accurate reporting, it's only a matter of time before something breaks. The question was never if, only when. Did you ever consider leaving? He asked. Every single day for the past 7 months, I said. But if I left, there'd be no one pushing back, no one documenting the problems. And when the inevitable investigation came, the firm could claim they didn't know there were issues. But with me here, on record, repeatedly raising concerns, they can't claim ignorance. They can only claim they chose to ignore the warnings. Okonkwo nodded slowly. You stayed so you could be a witness. I stayed because someone had to, I said. And because I took an oath when I got my compliance certifications, to put regulatory requirements above business interests, to report suspicious activity accurately and completely. Some people might think that's naive or idealistic, but I think it's just doing the job. He closed his notebook. You're free to go back to your desk, Miss Moreno. We'll likely need to speak with you again over the next few days. Keep your phone accessible. I left conference room 7 and walked back to my office. The floor was in chaos, people huddled in small groups whispering frantically. Our managers hurried past with panicked expressions. Someone from it was being escorted toward the conference rooms by Agent Martinez. When I sat down at my desk, I noticed that the calendar invite for my 5:30 p.m. termination meeting had been deleted. No explanation, no reschedule notice, just gone as if it had never existed. I opened my email. There was a message from Margaret Chen and her, sent at 5:06 p.m. Rochel, the meeting scheduled for this afternoon has been postponed indefinitely. Please disregard the previous invitation. We'll be in touch regarding next steps. I read it twice, then archived it without responding. At 5:43 p.m., Derek Paulson walked past my office. He looked like he'd aged a decade in the past hour. His face was pale. His hands were shaking as he carried his briefcase. He didn't look at me. Didn't acknowledge my existence. Rocked. At 6:00 p.m., I saw Victoria Ashworth through the glass walls of the executive conference room, sitting across from all 3 federal agents. Her lawyer had arrived, an expensive-looking woman in a tailored suit who was taking notes on a legal pad. Victoria's body language screamed defensive, arms crossed, jaw tight, the posture of someone who knows they're in serious trouble but isn't ready to admit it yet. At 7:15 p.m., most of the office had cleared out. The federal investigators were still conducting interviews. I could see them through conference room windows, taking notes, asking questions, pulling up documents on laptops. I finished organizing my files, packed my bag, and headed for the parking garage. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed. An email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line said, "Thank you." I opened it. "Rochel, you don't know me, but I'm a junior analyst in investments. I've been watching what's been happening with compliance for months, and I felt crazy for thinking it was wrong. Seeing you stand up to them today gives me hope that maybe doing the right thing actually matters. Stay strong. You're not alone." I sat in my car for a long moment, staring at that email. Then I started the engine and drove home. The next morning, I arrived at the office at 8:30 am to find the parking lot oddly empty. At least 20 people had called in sick. Word had spread overnight through text messages and phone calls. Everyone knew federal investigators were dismantling the compliance department, and nobody wanted to be the next person called in for questioning. I asked, but agents Castellano, Martinez, and Okonkwo were already there, set up in the largest conference room with boxes of files and multiple laptops spread across the table. I saw 2 other analysts from my departments sitting in separate conference rooms, both looking nervous and miserable. At 10:15 am, I received an email from our chief financial officer, a man named Thomas Brennan. Subject line, "Urgent conversation needed." I walked to his office. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a coffee cup that had clearly been refilled multiple times judging by the rings on his desk. "Rachel," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Thank you for coming. I know this is a difficult situation. Is it?" I asked mildly. He winced. "Fair point. Look, I'm going to be direct. The board held an emergency meeting last night. We've been reviewing the documentation that the FinCEN investigators requested, and we've also been going through the emails you sent over the past 7 months. And?" I said. "And you were right," he said. "About everything. The weakened SARs, the removed analysis, the downgraded risk assessments, all of it. The investigators showed us the side-by-side comparisons of your original work versus what actually got filed. It's damning, Rachel." He rubbed his face. "Victoria is being terminated effective immediately. Derek is being placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. We're bringing in an outside compliance consulting firm to conduct a complete review of every SAR we filed in the past 2 years. And we're self-reporting additional violations we've discovered to FinCEN before they find them." "That's a start," I said. "The board wants you to rebuild the compliance department," he said. "Full authority over all anti-money laundering operations. Direct reporting line to me and the board. Significant salary increase. Legal protections against any retaliation. Complete autonomy to implement whatever systems and procedures you think are necessary." I studied him. "Why me?" "Because you're the only person in this building who actually understands what compliance means," he said. "And because the FinCEN investigators made it very clear that if we don't fix this immediately and thoroughly, we're going to lose our licenses. Without those licenses, we can't operate as an investment advisory firm. Without that, this company folds within 6 months. So yes, Rachel, we need you. Desperately." "So this is about survival," I said. "I won't pretend it's purely about doing the right thing," he admitted. But that doesn't mean I don't recognize that you were trying to protect this company while everyone else was tearing it apart. You were the only one who saw the cliff we were heading toward, and you tried to stop us. We didn't listen. That's on us." I leaned back in my chair. "I'll need a few things." "Name them," he said, pen already poised over his notepad. "First, I want hiring authority. If I'm rebuilding compliance, I'm hiring people who understand that regulations aren't suggestions. Second, I want veto power over any business decision that impacts regulatory compliance. If I say something can't be done, it doesn't get done, regardless of what sales or operations wants. Third, I want quarterly presentations to the board where I report compliance status directly, without filtering from executive management." Thomas wrote quickly, "Done, done, and done, and done. What else?" "I want a formal written acknowledgement," I said. "From you, from the board, in company records. Not because I need it emotionally, but because I want it documented that this company ignored repeated warnings and was moving toward terminating the person who tried to prevent federal violations." If we're going to fix this, we start by being honest about what went wrong. He stopped writing and looked up at me. You'll have it by end of day. Then I'll take the position, I said. He exhaled, visible relief washing over his face. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, I said. You have no idea how much work this is going to require. Over the next 3 weeks, Harmon Financial Services transformed into something I barely recognized. The federal investigation expanded, more agencies got involved: Securities and Exchange Commission, Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, Department of Justice. Investigators became permanent fixtures. Entire departments were placed under review. Victoria Ashworth was gone within 48 hours of the investigation starting. Derek Paulson resigned rather than face termination. Both hired lawyers and stopped communicating with anyone at the company. The board brought in an interim CEO, a man named Richard Nakamura, who'd spent 35 years in financial services compliance and had zero tolerance for cutting corners. His first act was to freeze all new client onboarding for 30 days, while we conducted a comprehensive review of our existing client base. I don't care if it costs us revenue, he told the sales team during his first meeting. I care about not losing our licenses and not going to prison. I was promoted to Chief Compliance Officer and given an actual office with windows and a door that locked. Where my new team consisted of 5 people I personally recruited from other financial institutions, all with strong compliance backgrounds and zero interest in watering down reports to make executives comfortable. We spent weeks rebuilding everything: new SAR procedures, for my new transaction monitoring systems, new training protocols. We brought in external auditors to verify our work. We voluntarily disclosed additional violations we'd discovered during our internal review, because hiding problems was what created this disaster in the first place. It was exhausting, sometimes demoralizing, especially when we'd uncover yet another instance of weakened reporting or ignored red flags. But it was necessary. 3 months after the investigation began, I received a call from Agent Castellano. I wanted to give you an update, he said. The Department of Justice is moving forward with criminal charges against 2 individuals, your former CEO Victoria Ashworth and your former Chief Compliance Officer Derek Paulson. My breath caught. Criminal charges for what? Conspiracy to file false reports with federal agencies, obstruction of justice, and violation of the Bank Secrecy Act, he said. If convicted, they're each looking at significant prison time and substantial financial penalties. And the company? I asked. The company is facing civil penalties, he said. Crimes totaling approximately $322 million, plus enhanced monitoring requirements for the next 3 years. But because you've been cooperative and because you've implemented substantial corrective measures, the government isn't pursuing criminal charges against the institution itself. That's something, I said. It's more than something, Castellano said. In cases like this, companies often get shut down entirely. The fact that Harmon Financial Services is surviving is directly attributable to the documentation you provided and the cooperation you've offered. Your record saved this company, Rachel. Don't forget that. He paused. I also wanted to tell you that your case is being used as a training example in our office. What to do when you see compliance failures, how to document them properly, why speaking up matters even when it's difficult and dangerous. I appreciate that, I said. One more thing, he added. If you ever get tired of private sector work, give me a call. Finson is always looking for people who understand financial compliance and aren't afraid to enforce it, even when it's unpopular. I thanked him and ended the call. That evening, I sat in my new office after everyone else had gone home, looking at the compliance reports on my desk. We'd made progress, real progress, but there was still so much work ahead. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Derek Paulson. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. You were right about everything. I was too focused on making Victoria happy and not focused enough on doing the job correctly. I cost you your peace of mind and almost cost you your career. That's on me. I hope things work out for you. I stared at that message for a long time, then I deleted it without responding. Some apologies come too late to matter. Some damage can't be undone with a text message and hollow words. 6 months after the federal investigation began, I was invited to speak at a financial services compliance conference in Boston. The topic was maintaining regulatory integrity in high-pressure business environments. I almost declined. Public speaking wasn't my strength, and reliving the experience wasn't particularly appealing, but Richard Nakamura encouraged me to accept. People need to hear this story, he said. Not the corporate sanitized version, the real version. They need to hear what actually happens when compliance gets treated like an inconvenience instead of a foundation. So I went. The conference room was packed. Approximately 300 compliance professionals, all of them with similar stories of being ignored, overruled, or dismissed. I could see it in their faces before I even started speaking, the exhaustion, the frustration, the quiet anger of people who do important work that nobody appreciates until something goes catastrophically wrong. I told them everything, the weekend reports, the ignored warnings, the retaliation, the investigation, the arrests. I showed them actual emails from my documentation, with names redacted. I explained how I'd organized my evidence, how I'd protected myself, how I'd survived. When I finished, the room was silent for several seconds. Then someone in the back row stood up and started clapping, then another person, then another. Within seconds, the entire room was on their feet. I stood at the podium genuinely stunned as 300 compliance professionals applauded, not because I'd done something heroic, but because I'd done something they all wished they had the courage to do. I'd stood my ground when everyone else was demanding I step aside. After the presentation, dozens of people approached me. They shared their own stories, their own battles with executives who didn't understand or didn't care about regulatory requirements, their own fears about retaliation. But one woman, a compliance officer at a community bank, gripped my hand tightly. "Thank you," she said. "I've been documenting problems at my institution for 8 months. I've been terrified to escalate them, but after hearing your story, I know what I have to do. Document everything," I told her. "Every warning, every response, every time you raise a concern, and don't be afraid to contact regulators if you need to. That's what they're there for." She nodded, eyes bright with something that looked like hope. I flew home that evening, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not vindication exactly, not satisfaction. Something quieter. Purpose, maybe. The sense that suffering through those 7 months of hell had meaning beyond just my own survival. A year after the investigation began, I sat in my office reviewing our latest compliance metrics. SAR filing accuracy was up 340%. Transaction monitoring had caught 3 serious money laundering schemes that we'd referred to law enforcement. Employee compliance training scores had improved dramatically. We'd rebuilt something real. My phone rang. An unfamiliar number with a Washington, D. area code. "Rachel Moreno," I answered. "Miss Moreno, this is Agent Castellano. I wanted to let you know that the criminal trials concluded last week. Victoria Ashworth was convicted on all charges. She's facing 4 years in federal prison and 50,000 in fines. Derek Paulson took a plea deal, 3 years probation, 200,000 in fines, and he's permanently barred from working in financial services compliance." I closed my eyes. "Justice, then." "Justice," he agreed. "Your testimony was crucial. The documentation you provided was airtight. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours." "Good," I said. "There's one more thing," Castellano added. "The civil penalties against your company have been reduced by 40% based on your cooperation and the remediation efforts you've led. The judge specifically cited your actions as an example of what institutional compliance should look like." That's good news," I said. "It's more than good news. It's vindication. You were right, Rachel, about everything, and now there's a federal court record proving it." After we hung up, I sat quietly for a long moment. Then I opened my computer and started drafting next quarter's compliance report. The work continues. It always does. But now when I send a warning email, when I flag a suspicious transaction, when I push back against a business decision that creates regulatory risk, people listen. Not because I'm special, not because I'm particularly brave, but because everyone in this building now understands what happens when you don't listen to your compliance officer. They've seen the federal agents in the conference rooms. They've watched executives get arrested, they've paid the fines and endured the enhanced monitoring. They've learned the hard way that compliance isn't an obstacle to business, it's the foundation that keeps the entire structure from collapsing. And me? I'm still here, still doing the unglamorous work. Still reviewing transaction patterns and filing SARs and making sure our reports to federal agencies actually reflect reality. It's not exciting work. Nobody writes headlines about the compliance officer who prevented a violation. But I sleep well at night. And in this industry, that's worth more than any corner office or executive title. Because at the end of the day, I can look at myself in the mirror and know I did the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it was dangerous, even when everyone else was telling me to stay quiet and go along. I stood my ground, and I'm still standing.